Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. Recently we've seen a spate of fake news emanate, and there was a lot of speculation on it. There was a lot of debate on it. It was about a politician and her family, and then it was later, we saw it on it was picked up by private media, it was talked about. And the issue of fake news, of course, comes up again and again. We've seen the government talk about it, the concern they've shown. Also with respect to that, we've seen the issue of media ethics, the spread of this fake news come up again, and the government move towards making rules which have been, of course, something which they have been under fire for. There is a lot of speculation, there is a lot of critique, there is a lot being said about the fact that these are being made to govern or censor the content. We'll be talking about whether this is a move to deal with the issue of fake news that has happened, that has come up time and again. We are seeing as far as social media is concerned, or does it do all the things that it has been criticized for? It has been criticized for trying to change narratives, trying to control social media, all of those things. We'll be talking about whether the new rules gives that kind of power to the PTA, and does it aim to do those things or not? Does it aim to regulate perhaps the issue of fake news? All of that today on Perspective. I have with me Naseem Siddiqui, who is a senior journalist. Thank you for joining us today. Dr. Majid Khan, who is analyst of media warfare, propaganda and hybrid warfare. Thank you for being with us today. We also have with us Nigat Dad, who is founder of Digital Rights Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. Naseem sir, like I said, the issue of fake news is not a new one. We've seen it happen time to time. We've seen different kinds of fake news come up, and then the debate that happens on it, the issue of whether, once it's out, then of course, there is no way of, having it, it's out. So obviously there's a lot of speculation on it, there's a lot of propaganda on it, and, unfortunately, whoever it relates to, that kind of damage control you can't do once, of course, in this kind of digital age and all that. Do you think that firstly, do you think in the kind of environment that we are in today, where freedom of speech is a big issue, freedom of expression is a big issue, the Constitution gives us those rights, all of that, is it right, in your opinion, for the government to try to regulate it, in your opinion? Is there a need for that kind of regulation?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much, Mahrukh. Yes, fake news is a big challenge at the moment. You have seen that you have been doing journalism for quite some time. For the newspapers, for the print media, there is always an editor. So he just look into the news and then it goes into the print. Then in electronic media, we have gatekeepers like director news and supervisors. But on the social media, there is no control at the moment. There is a lot of good news and fake on social media as well, and there is a lot of fake news as well, and there is no control. In the Western countries, you have seen that if there is some fake news, last days you have seen that one lady who blames Zulfi Bukhari, he has to apologize, he has to pay fine as well, but in Pakistan there is no rule like that.
Because because of the law of defamation, because the laws are stronger there in that sense.
We do have laws here as well, but there is no implementation of those laws. So I think the government should go for the laws for the social media as well.
Do you think that there is need for regulation?
There is a big need for it, yes.
Fair enough. Dr. Majid, what about you? Do you think that this kind of regulation, as far as social media is concerned, it's not only, we can't just say that it relates to Pakistan, because the advent of social media is everywhere. And there are certain checks and balances as far as all these social media sites are concerned. I don't think I'm wrong when I say, if you talk about Twitter, Facebook, all of these social media sites have their own rules, which relate to, criminal activity also. I want to come to that later, but do you think in that kind of scenario, in that kind of background, we need that kind of regulation?
I think we need this for very long ages, I believe. Since some 20 years back, we had needed this.
We needed it, yes.
We had needed it. We were too late about that. Okay. But the problem is, I'm not sure the people who made this law, are they concerned with these companies or not?
Okay.
Because the thing is that we don't have a power to enforce them. They are the big media giants. The big media giants. How we can control them? As per my information, somewhere that they follow the court decision. If you ask them to withdraw or disperse something from their content, they will do only if the court order them. Such kind of law, I'm not sure you can counter these people. So did you consult with them or not? This is my point of view.
Okay, fair enough. Let me come back to you. Nigat, I don't know if, consultation, according to Dr. Majid, he's saying that were these companies, were the social media platforms consulted before these rules were propagated, and also whether we will have the power of implementation over these, of course, as far as our country is concerned, from my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we will have the right, as far as our own country is concerned, to enforce them. Isn't that true?
So I think it's very important to sort of look at the background. It's Prevention of Electronic Crime Act, which is basically Section 37. Under that have draft of these rules last year out of after the hue and cry internet company.
There's a problem with her audio. We'll come back to her. Naseem Saab, whether you talk about the fact that, of course, regulation, you are saying, and Dr. Majid also agrees, that we need regulation in the kind of scenario that we have. Considering the fact that, of course, like you just mentioned, as far as this other issue, as far as defamation is concerned, all of that, we have certain limitations, we have certain issues, we have certain what can one say, as far as our laws are concerned, implementational issues, issues relating to reform as far as law is concerned. So in those kind of limited circumstances, perhaps it wouldn't be wrong to say that we would need this kind of regulation. But then, and on the other hand, of course, when you are regulating, or when you are trying to, even if you're not trying to curtail the freedom of expression, that balance is very important.
The freedom of expression and fake news is totally two different things. Yes, Dr. Majid was saying that we cannot regulate these giants at the moment, but because they are taking a lot of revenue from Pakistan, they are making a lot of money from Pakistan, so we should have got in some agreement with them.
We've had YouTube, we know that we've had YouTube banned for a long time.
Yeah, for a long time. Yes. So in this world we cannot ban each and everything, but we should have got some agreements with them, and our agencies should go for the fake accounts. There are too many fake accounts in Pakistan as well, whether it is on Facebook, whether it is on Twitter, those are spreading fake news. You can see that this fifth generation hybrid war is on as well.
My point is that when there is this power, the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority will have this power to clamp down on content it feels in violation of, Chapter 14 of PPC, whatever, which is against public health, decency, safety, and convenience. I'm reading this. The point is, are we giving too much discretion to them, and how will they determine what content then is against public health, decency, safety, and convenience? Dr. Majid.
First of all, I want to point these 5 points that they're raising this law. The first point is glory of Islam. I think this should be a glory of religion. Because we have other religion as well. I think it should be one of Islam. Every religion is respectable. Every glory of every religion is respectable. Second thing, in the fourth point, decency and morality. Who is the authority to judge the decency and morality?
That's what I'm saying. So if you're giving that yardstick to the PTA, then you're empowering them, and they have that discretion. And how do they decide? I mean, what are the parameters for them to then decide?
It's not mentioned there. This is my point. Is there the thing is how we decide? In Pakistan, we have different sector societies. Some societies for ethics values are different. For some of them, the ethics values are different. So how you define the decency and morality for them? Who are the authority? Who will judge them? Here's the problem.
So let me come back to you. I think Nigat is back with us. Nigat, you think that, when we talk about the concept, of course, of law and morality, which is that debate which has gone on for a long time, in terms of how do you think that this discretionary power, which under these rules will lie with the PTA, how will they determine it? Do you think it's fair to say that they will have some yardstick to determine what is against public health, decency, all of that, and then of course the religion issue which Dr. Majid has talked about? Nigat, can you hear me? No, I don't think she can. Also, there is this other provisions that relate to within the rules is also, when you talk about it's restricted, the users of social media can be restricted, there can also be, criminal behavior, all of that, but that is already, the question is, if you talk about criminal behavior, that's already under the Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act. So, in that sense, we wouldn't need new rules. The concept of the issue for the government, I think, is the critique which is coming out is that the power to control narratives will then lie with the government. Do you think that's true?
Well, government should not control the media or social media. But on the other hand, we cannot control or look into the system of the social media because we don't have access to that one, whether it is Twitter or it is Instagram. But whoever is spreading the fake news, that can be kept, or the agencies can work on that.
And also, once the content actually comes out, it's very easy to save it, and then you can then
which IP address has been used, who has made this account, and who is spreading this fake news. So if the law is made more good, so then they can quote those people, and then they can go after that. So if someone is punished, then the others learn a lesson.
Now, let me, Nigat, are you with us now?
I am.
Yeah, because we've been talking about the fact that does this legislation, in your opinion, restrict the power of freedom of expression?
All right, I'm sorry, I was I didn't have a good connection, but what I was trying to basically say was that this argument that we had no regulation or law before these rules is actually incorrect, because we had Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, which was enacted in 2016. Yeah, and under that act, we have two agencies. One is Federal Investigation Agency, Cybercrime Wing, looking into the the criminal side of the cybercrime, and one is the content moderation side of it, which is Pakistan Telecommunication Authority. So the rules basically have emerged out of Section 37 of Prevention of Electronic Crimes. Now, I think it's very important to talk about the constitutionality of these rules, and I think that has been under discussion quite a lot. That have we been really successful in implementing the laws that we already had? Have we really looked into the performance of the bodies that were, those who had power under those laws in terms of implementing the law that we already had? And I think these are the important things that we really need to discuss. Do we need more regulation, or we need, enforcement and implementation? Where do we lack, I guess? So that's the main conversation that we were about to have.
Fair enough. I think you raise a very important point. You're saying that as far as, do we need, I mean, that's an age-old, as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think that's a very old debate, because, we either supplement our laws, we increase them, we legislate more, instead of, probably dealing with issues of implementation, which are across the board as far as our law is concerned. There's no denying that. I don't think anybody would. But the point is, as far as fake news is concerned, which should be, I think, a cause of concern to all political parties, not just the government at this time. We've seen how it has, it's happening all the time. It's happening with regard to all, political parties, people in all political parties. It's coming out. A lot of content is coming out. A lot of gross content is coming out. And once it's out, it's out. It doesn't matter, whether there are denials, whatever happens. So what do we do then to deal with that, even with the laws that we have at this time?
Yeah, so Mahrukh, I think it's very important, and I think important for my fellow panelists to also understand that, we cannot really address the issue of fake news, misinformation and disinformation, and we also need to differentiate between all these categories, that are sort of floated around. And sort of understand what does it mean when we say fake news? What does it mean when we say disinformation? And what I'm trying to say is that I'm not against regulation. What I'm against is over-regulation. And if we need good strategies, including regulation, right? So we cannot address this problem in isolation only with law. So how many of us have seen public awareness raising campaign around fake news or spotting fake news and how to report those to the platforms, right? So I think there are all these things that are already available, but how we are using it. So for instance, in the beginning you mentioned that there was a conversation around defamation laws. So why we are not doing anything to strengthen these existing laws, right? So if someone says anything online and it's incorrect and it's harming anyone's reputation, then our existing laws should be strong enough that any person can go and use that law instead of separate laws that are sort of now governing social media and internet. By the way, we already have one enacted in 2016.
Okay, fair enough. Ms. Sinsab, do you agree? I think that what Nidit is saying, she's saying that it doesn't matter whether, we go and get these, we promulgate new laws or these rules. The point is, why can't we have the concept, which is I think what you said also, that if there is, actionable, there is action against content of the sort that comes out, then we will see people being more careful, because we see that people are running scot-free with regard to any content, and there is also once something comes out, there is also this general the person who is against will come out and say, well, it wasn't, it was all what's the word for it? I think the technical word is that it's not accurate, it's not genuine. There's no way of proving it, so to speak.
Exactly, we have got too many laws at the moment. Camera is there, he is looking after the electronic media as well. So first of all, we have to decide that what is the fake news. We have to give the definition of the fake news. We have laws, we have to implement them. Then again, as far as the things are proceeding, we should make new laws as well. And the important thing is always that when you implement these laws, when you give fine to the people, then they will not move scot-free, as you said. So the basic problem is that the people are moving scot-free and there is no law, or there is no implementation of the law. And whereas this fake news is damaging religion and other things as well, whatever people think, they just go on the social media, they put it over there, fake news, and it is spread like anything. You can see that when the messages on the WhatsApp comes, people don't even think, the people even don't read it, and they just kept them forwarding.
And this isn't even over, this is about not only, it's about people who allegedly have, people say that have passed away.
Yes.
And even that is circulated all over social media with people messaging, saying sorry and all of that, and then,
they have to come on the media and they have to tell that it's death. The same thing happened with Dr. Abdul Qadir before his death, and for the many other people as well.
Which is, a lot of, of course, it means a lot of anguish for the family, which is not there, and it doesn't.
If somebody is young and somebody is woman, then it's very damaging, and there is no come out, there is no law. That the people caught those who are spreading these fake news.
Dr. Majid, technical, before, please go on.
I want to add something with the thing I second with him, this is right. This is the era of information. This information and fake news is everywhere. The problem is everywhere, not only Pakistan. We are facing the same thing. Right now, a young kid of 15-year-old with a mobile phone is a direct access is under reach of your enemy. And he can shape his mind. If you read the campaign of the Trump in the first of his election, we found that 5.9 million videos he made, propaganda videos in the election campaign, and he changed the shape of the mind of the people, and he won the election. And all of the surveys are against that. So we can find how the powerful social media is there.
And we've seen what happened as far as India is concerned with the recent New Zealand attack and all of that.
Yes, we have seen it. My point is that the thing is that from the law is the good thing to make the law, and the law should be applicable. This is very important thing. Law should be applicable to these parties. If they say that we will not bother this, the thing is that I ask from the member of the PTA or the authorities, what is the second option? If they say we will back off from Pakistan,
I will come back to you. We have Fawad Chaudhary with us, the Federal Minister for Information with us. Fawad, there's a lot of criticism on these rules, and a lot is being said about the fact that this is a way for the government to change the narrative, to curtail the freedom. How would you answer that? Ji, can you hear me? No, there's problem with audio. Ji, please continue.
I will add one thing. The thing is that this is era of information. You can't stop information. What do? What you can do, you have to educate your people. You have to educate the people about the fake news, how to analyze the fake news. You have to, in the first time, you have to educate about the people about the propaganda, psychological warfare, grey propaganda, white propaganda, altered images. These are concepts we have to educate. First of all, we have to educate our journalists first. We have to educate our producers first. We have to educate all the information, all the people who use information, because they are why the journalists are the frontline soldiers in the war of information. And the second thing, we have to educate our academia about these lines. They are very clear lines.
Marissa, when you talk about educating journalists, I think that's a very fair point. I want to come to that. Nigat, as far as educating journalists is concerned, as far as making sure that there is some, they have their own parameters, their own ethics involved with regard to sharing this information. With regard to sharing of this kind of information, how do we deal with that? How do we, how do we deal with that? How do we educate our journalists? How do we educate move towards?
The Ministry of Information should be on board. The top of the ministry were educating the journalism departments are there. They also on board. They make a syllabus like that we should understand, because right now is a time of hybrid warfare. All is exercise of non-military tools, and because I told you earlier, the 15-year-old boy is now in the direct access of your enemy. He can change his mind. He should the PTM what call it the Pakhtun movement of the Pashtun movement. There was a nice example of that. How they because all of their pages were run from the India and Afghanistan, and they were influencing our young boys, especially in the Pakhtun belt, and they influenced them, and you can't imagine how much they convert their ideology against Pakistan, against the of institutions. So they work against it. So first thing is that we have to educate our people. We have to tell them when the information, because when the propaganda swings, it comes up heavily, our own people swings in that propaganda.
Right. Nigat, we've been talking about the fact that, of course, we've been talking about there's no dearth of laws and implementation, all of that. But as far as journalists are concerned, don't you think that there is a responsibility on as far as journalism is concerned, the concept of ethics, the concept of making sure that there is some corroboration of news that is then forwarded even on social media. Of course, it's difficult, more difficult than on print media and other kinds of media. But don't you think that there are there checks in place? Let me ask you.
I don't really think that the checks are in place, especially when it comes to individuals who have, who are using their personal social media accounts for journalistic purposes. And it's important to note that, when it comes to mainstream media or other print media, there are proper editorial controls, and, journalists and mainstream media sort of follow ethical guidelines, whatever the journalistic principles are. But when it comes to social media, I haven't seen that. I myself have a problem with that, because several times I have seen journalists with massive following sharing a news without even verification. And that sort of, says a lot about the ethics, but also, the responsibility that is on the shoulders of journalists who are using social media. So, that's where I really try to focus on self-regulation, that all these journalists who are using social media, they have this duty and responsibility that they are supposed to use internet in a similar fashion, the way they are writing articles in the newspapers, and they have editorial control over them, or they are speaking on their TV channels, and there is an editorial control and certain guidelines that they are supposed to follow. But that's not the case with the internet, and I think that's where they really need to realize that instead of having these controls coming from the state, they are supposed to do it themselves. Means not just the individual journalists, but
But
also
in the absence of that not happening, do you think that is something that perhaps the state should control then? Because, a sharing of information that is not genuine, I mean, there has to be some responsibility there, right? Because when you have acclaimed journalists sharing information that they don't know whether it's genuine or not, there's no authenticity on it, then you need to have some checks there. So I think that's where the government is coming from also, when they say that, so much of those areas are then unregulated, and perhaps there is need for regulation there.
So, as I already said, the regulation, the law is already there. I think the state needs to find ways how to implement that properly and how to equip the existing law enforcement authority or the other authority which is supposed to do content moderation. But at the same time, I agree with Majid in terms of doing digital media literacy or digital literacy for that matter, not just with media or journalists, but our young people, children in our schools. During COVID, we have seen everyone has gone online, right? And people absolutely have no idea the kind of content that they are accessing, the kind of content that they are posting, whether that sort of and they are entering into a jurisdiction of like a criminal activity or not. And that's the kind of awareness and knowledge we are supposed to raise among our communities and society. And honestly, Mahrukh, I feel you can make 10 regulations. If the awareness is not there, the society is not going to follow those regulations, or so what state will end up doing.
There is awareness, and then there is also the concept of having some sort of holding people to task, knowing that they will be held accountable, which is something else that we've been talking about. With regard to this recent information, misinformation, and then the apology that was tendered on Twitter, on social media, I think these are things that can make a difference. If I'm not wrong, I'm going to go to Naseem Saab. Naseem Saab, isn't it true that this instance where we have this lady coming and apologizing, which she was told to do on social media and very publicly, these are things that perhaps will then, when it is seen to be done, it will make a difference to people, that they will know that there are checks and they will be held accountable. Only if they were within our country, it would perhaps be easier.
Definitely, you have seen that some of the channels which are running in Pakistan, they are running in London as well. They were charged for defamation as well, and they have to pay the money. So they are very much cautious when they are giving some content in London or in UK or in the West. Same is happened with that lady. She won something from one TV channel, and now she has to pay what she defamed the minister in Pakistan. So now she will be very careful, or the people who are fined, they will be very careful. So the same thing is Pakistan, that they are not fined, there is no charges against anybody. People go for defamation. Politicians go after one another. Shehbaz Sharif has got some cases against Prime Minister Imran Khan. Prime Minister Imran Khan has some cases against Waj Asif. But there is delay in the justice as well. The cases are going for a longer time. So as soon as we don't make any example, nobody is afraid of these things.
You're saying that the concept of, of course, we need to hold people accountable
and speedy trials as well.
And of course, that goes to the root of the fact that, we need to revamp our legal system, reform of law reform, which has been on the agenda for a while. Those are long-term goals, no, Dr. Majid?
I'm telling one thing. Same kind of allegation was done by few senior journalists of Pakistan on live TV channel. The same allegation was by that lady. But the thing is that Zulfi Bukhari went to London. He had a trust on that system and had no trust on this system. So that's why he didn't go for that, because we don't have any example. So our system of judicial system, the thing is that judiciary is a filter. They filter every kind of the bad thing.
So then in that sense, when the government aims to make these rules, this would then be a speedy way of dealing with that, and that's what the government is saying. So perhaps you think they have a point when they say that, because it's not happening there, it's not happening with the revamping of the legal system, all of that, when you have a separate body like the PTA dealing with this, and having, those certain parameters under which those rules will act, under which they will be evaluated, provided, there can be those parameters, then perhaps it would lead to people seeing that people are being held accountable, justice is being done, and then that will, translate into a better society, more ethical journalism, so to speak.
Yeah, it would be. It would be if it would be materialized. It would be. The thing is that, but I can't see in the near future it will be materialized because of
why?
Because in social media something else. Social media
of course, regulation of social media will be, of course, it's more difficult than any other kind of media.
Because the media giants are not from here, from Pakistan. They are not running Pakistani companies there. They're coming from overseas. So this is a problem for them. It's not easy to deal with them. Let's see how they will deal with them, but we need a very solid strategy to counter these people.
Nighat, can you tell us a little bit about that? You think that as far as, because we saw in India that there was a raid on Twitter offices and that didn't go down well. Do you think that kind of regulation, how will it go down with, of course, these social media platforms?
Yeah, so social media platforms have their own community guidelines, which are developed keeping in mind, the global UN guiding principles on business and human rights. These tech giants haven't developed any community guidelines for any specific countries, right? So their community guidelines are global, they apply. However, when certain bodies, for instance PTA or FIA, escalate content with them to take down or asking for users information, they look into the local laws and then they sort of act accordingly. So if you sort of look at the news 2 days back, TikTok basically took down 9 million TikTok videos only from Pakistan, which in the last 1 quarter, which makes it the second highest in the world. So it doesn't mean that we are bringing this regulation because tech companies haven't really abided by our local laws. They did, but I think our regulator basically wants more from them, and I think we really need to look into our relationship with the tech companies, how we are building that relationship. If we are bringing this regulation, how this regulation is going to be implemented, again, going back to the Majid's point. And I'm actually very curious and interested in sort of seeing how these tech giants will sort of follow these regulations and their reaction over this notification.
Right, fair enough. Nasita, as far as social media is concerned, of course, whether we restrict social media, whether it should be free for all, is a debate that has been going on for a long time. But it's also true that as far as other societies like the West is concerned, education is a huge factor. Awareness, again, which is what Nighat was talking about, is a huge factor. In our kind of society where, we have our limitations as far as education is concerned, as far as, our legal law is concerned, implementational side, we have those difficulties, all of those things. In that kind of scenario, having, again, these kind of rules, whether they can be altered or whether they can be amended, whatever, subject to that kind of consultation from all stakeholders, do you think that it's a good idea then?
Definitely, education is the most important thing. We should educate people, but as you said, we cannot educate everybody.
And also to let them go.
Literacy rate is very low in Pakistan. So there are regulations already at the moment. So first of all, we should try to implement them. And if we are bringing some more regulations, the stakeholders, the journalists, press councils, the media owners, they should be taken on board, and then you can just decide that which law should be brought in or which law should be taken out of that regulation. So with consultation, you can bring a better thing.
But primarily, you think that it's a good idea in that kind of scenario, in the kind of limitations that we have to have, rules.
It's a very good idea for government because there are too many institutions at the moment. They are trying to bring all of them under one umbrella. When it comes under one umbrella, it's easier to proceed. It's easier to implement the regulations. So if they can sit down with the stakeholders and they can decide, then it will definitely bring a big change in the society.
Dr. Majid, we say that freedom of free speech is subject to restrictions under the Constitution, and of course we our higher judiciary, superior judiciary, is supposed to interpret that. So when we say that we give PTA that power, some criticism is that that we're giving them the power of a judge, executioner. We're giving them all the powers. Do you think that is a legitimate criticism?
The thing is that freedom of expression, once I was interviewed by SPS, Australian News Channel. They asked me that the Pakistani government has law of expression, there is no freedom of expression in Pakistan. I asked him, can you tell me what is the freedom of expression? Do you have a right to abuse you? Do you have a right to abuse your religion, your army, your institutions? No. As the Pope said, if you punch me, if you curse my mother, you make your face ready for a punch. The thing is that for freedom, every freedom has its own bylines. Without lines, there is no freedom. This is something using someone. PTA, the thing is that it's a new thing to judging the morality. I am concerned about all these 4 points, the morality and decisiveness, because the thing is that how we judge them. Because in Pakistan we have different sects, different societies. So every sect have different ethics and morality values. So how we judge them? This is my concern.
No, but when we talk about ethics, or when we talk about content that is contrary to public health or decency, all of that, I think that is supposed to, it's discretionary certainly, but it's supposed to cover protection of religion also. Isn't that true?
Depends. It depends on the story.
Once it's interpreted, we'll have a clearer idea. Nigat, do you think that, we've been talking just yes or no? You think that it's a good idea to have this kind of regulation?
I don't have one answer to this, but
okay, please elaborate.
Well, so building on Majid's point, I think it's important, or these vague and ambiguous terminologies, we really need to leave this up to the judiciary to interpret them in a way, because judiciary is the only authority where you can have these, proper, you'll have a proper sort of idea what does it mean when they say morality or obscenity or decency. And I think leaving it up to an authority, I don't think
that there are some limitations as far as our legal system are concerned, and I think the government is trying to circumvent those by giving that power to the PTA.
But it's not really constitutional then, right? So in our constitution, I think the job is for the judiciary to interpret all these terminologies when it comes to specifically content moderation or taking down or leaving up content or deciding what to publish and what not to publish.
No, but I mean, it's constitutional. Constitution says, that there has to be right of free speech, and then it says that it's subject to limitations. What those limitations are, I think the PTA will probably do it in the light of already precedents that are in the field, and the rulings that have already been seen. There are some rulings in the field certainly where freedom of expression has been interpreted by the judiciary.
You see, what you are saying, I agree to this, but at the same time,
but primarily because of the kind of, our limitations as a society. Again, I want to stress on that. Our limitations within our legal system, our limitations within the fact that, as far as education is concerned. Again, you've also said awareness is a huge issue. Awareness is certainly, as far as Pakistan is concerned, awareness of and also being held accountable, which is a huge issue as far as social media is concerned, because to a large section of our society, it's unfettered territory. It's you can completely do whatever you want, however you want. Doctored videos, doctored content is swimming. You're swimming in it everywhere. And then, of course, the concept of sharing, all of that. There is primarily need for regulation of that, whether, whichever body then does it, right?
Yeah, so Mahrukh, I do not disagree with this, like the concept of regulation. What I'm saying is having a regulation with meaningful consultation, regulation that is needed after having like a proper consultation with stakeholders. But at the same time, seeing whether we have like all those resources to implement that certain regulation. At the same time, adding other strategies like digital media literacy, having good partnerships with tech giants. At the same time, do we really have like other protective measures? For instance, data protection law, while we are saying we are going to do data localization under these rules, right? So I think these are all the questions that have been raised and are being raised by other people as well. So having a regulation is not a bad idea, but having a good regulation is like something that I have been raising.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us, Nazeem Siddiqui Saab. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Majid Khan, thank you for being with us. Nigat Dad, thank you for joining us today. Of course, primarily regulation perhaps is needed as far as social media is concerned. In the kind of environment that we have, in the kind of limitations that we've talked about that unfortunately exist at this time, perhaps regulation is need of the hour, which is what the government has felt when they've tried to field these rules under the ambit of PTA. Before we say good night, we'll have a small package on that for you. Thank you for joining us today.
Pakistan's Ministry of Information and Technology announced new social media rules titled The Removal and Blocking of Unlawful Content Rules 2021 that will empower the telecom regulator to block any website or platform on the directives of court and federal government. Under the new rules, the social media companies will have to register with the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority within 3 months and establish offices in the country as and when feasible. Once these rules are ratified, they will have binding effects on the social media companies offering their services to Pakistani consumers. The rules allow people to file complaints to block or remove online content if aggrieved. Service providers and social media companies will have to block access to or remove the disputed online content for which they will face action. The penalty may be as high as rupees 500 million. Federal Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry, while addressing a seminar on politics and journalism in the age of fake news, that the greatest challenge being faced by the modern media was the dissemination of false propaganda through fake news. While highlighting the Indian propaganda against Pakistan, the minister was of the view that the international community would have to prepare some rules to counter fake news, and the aspect of responsibility would have to be added with freedom of expression. Quoting the examples from West, the minister said the United States, the United Kingdom and the European Union had introduced online security rules, and we also need to move in a similar direction. It is to be mentioned here that for democracy to thrive and political culture to mature, free flow of information and news is of vital importance, but content relating to terrorism, hate speech, pornography and anti-national security matter should not be allowed by PTI or any other government in the world.